Hello, my name is Mike Hicks, and we're going to be talking about an analyzation and illustration of Luther Gulick. An overview of the presentation is that we'll be talking about Luther Gulick's overall theory of organization and the POSDC ORB advantages and disadvantages. I'd like to first start this presentation with a quote from Luther Gulick. Work division is the foundation of organization, indeed the reason for organization. With his overall strategy of breaking down a process and limiting it to certain characteristics within that process of each individual, the first question you're going to have to ask is, why divide the work? There's three concepts when contemplating on how we're going to divide up the work, and that's human nature, character, it reflects the training, the effectiveness of the person, reaction, qualifications, certifications, whatever the requirement is to get that task completed. The next is time. When we're talking about time, there's a certain amount of time that's limited to get the task assigned to get completed. And then on the end of that is space. Do you have enough space to do what you need to do? Is it ventilated properly? There's other considerations you have to take into effect. So the first thing we want to look into here is manpower with those qualifying statistics, and then understand that the manpower issues, as they are broken down, the end result, is there anything gained by the separation of dividing up a step within that process? And when you're dividing up that step, the subdivision must not pass beyond the physical division into an organic type division. You got to ask a couple questions. Does the division work out? Is something vital destroyed or lost? And does it bleed? And the main thing in the whole thing is to keep safety in mind. After you have the limitations and everything described, we're going to talk about the whole and parts of the process. Is the entire process going to be broken down, just part of it, or what? All parts of the process must be accounted for. To get that accountability factor completed, there's got to be a coordinated effort to get the work done. Now, that doesn't include just the performance of the operator doing a specific task, but it includes the management functions, what the work assignment is, how he's going to do it, is the training completed, with all procedures and coordinated effort brought into that effect as well. So management has responsibilities within this structure as well. So in that coordination of work, you have an authority. Within that authority, you're going to look for a single direct point of contact within that authority, so the person doesn't have to go all over the place to get several different answers to one question. There's got to be a system expert there. So you have to define the problem first. In defining that problem, you provide that director, you determine the nature and number of specialized work that needs to be done, or what unit has to be done at a skillful level, and establish the perfect structure of authority and the work subdivisions, the major objective met for efficiency. After you get that single direct point of contact with authority, you can work, and you got to work as a team. You want to make it a culture. You got to make a culture belief that everybody's going to do it the same way in the strategy of ownership of the work plan. So that strategy of an ownership, what I'm talking about is, if the worker is working in any situation and he believes he has ownership within that structure, he's going to work harder to get that particular task completed in an efficient manner. And then, of course, it all depends on the small and large enterprises, simpler, complex situations, and stable or new environments. Those are all effects that can affect the situation at hand. Now, human nature we got to talk about is the span of control, including limits of time and energy. Henry Fayol said, I quote, "A minister has 20 assistants, where the administrative theory says that a manager at the head of the big undertaking should not have more than 5 or 6. There are several variables that affect the amount of resources or considerations adequate for the task at hand, so that everybody's going to have a little bit different theory. The amount of people is going to be used where. But the span of control is where you're looking at. What you have to concentrate on to get the human nature limits within the time and energy that's going to be put on the project. You need one leader, one master. You got to look at unity of command, which is a huge MPA term. It's reflected, this particular term is reflected to those who are commanded, not for the commander. Taylor said, Taylor in his theory, which we all discussed earlier on the breakdown of specific assignments, um, he actually set up a separate foreman to deal with the process with authority. And what they were doing with these authoritative figures, they're giving orders to each individual workman. Well, that ended up being basically too many chiefs, is how I saw it. So there's got to be some type of common sense brought into the picture for when you're coordinating work efforts. The next part of this discussion will talk about the technical theory or the technical efficiency. We have to, the group must be unified, and that the group cannot be given technical direction from a layman. Goodnow, I quote, Goodnow says, to heterogeneous functions, politics and administration, the combination of which cannot be undertaken within the structure of the administration without producing inefficiency. Well, that's how ironic. What a great quote that is. To me, the common sense line is the common man knows what he needs than any of the so-called experts. And the common man is the final judge on what's good for him. Next thing I want to talk about is organizational patterns. The problem of organization must be approached from the top and the bottom philosophies as well, from the top down as well as from the bottom up. Their juncture must have an efficient intersection. The overall effect generated from the theory is to organize and institutionalize the executive function in a much more adequate in a complicated situation. So we want to be more adequate in what we're doing, how we're doing it, overall equipment effectiveness, and overall management effectiveness. When we're talking about organizational patterns, we have to include the organization of the executive. The questions that come into mind here are, what is the work of the chief executive? And another question that needs to be answered is, what does he or she do as a chief executive? Well, the POSDCORB formula, that's an acronym, and that was generated through Gulick. He's thinking when he developed it, he said that for the proper management and development, it is necessary that planning must be done. Every part of the organization must go through planning. There are several parts of every organization, and all of them shall be brought under one effective umbrella management, and this is called organization or organizing. So as you can see, that's the basic, the 2 steps and how it started. And when it did start in the 40s and 50s, this formula created enthusiasm in the minds of some public administration personnel and earned wide popularity. Subsequently, it faced off a lot of criticisms as well, which we'll get into later. Um, we'll go over through the formula real quick, and so I can describe it to you. Planning, and that's the outline of what needs to be done. That's the P in the first letter in the formula. We have to have an overall strategy, where we're going, what's going to be done for the day, How's it going to get done? How's it going to get organized in that structure? What needs to go from the start of the process to the end? Organization, the O, established a formal structure of authority. That says the hierarchy in which we're going to generate this product, who we're going to use to get it done, where we can go for information, if a problem should occur, and who's leading the project. Then we have to talk about staffing. Within that process, there are people that have to work, that have got to be trained. The maintenance personnel, as well as the process tech and whoever else you would have within that strategy. You have to have qualified people, certified people. Um, you have to look in situations that verify that this is completed as well in the training process, and check off list and signatures of proper authorities saying that that particular person can work on that process safely. Then you get to the D, which is directing and coordinating, decision making and maintain order. So you're in this area, the management's got to know where the process is, where his people are. If something happens, he's got to make a decision on what avenue to take to fix the problem or to shut down the assembly right at that point. It all depends. There's a lot of factors that are involved in there, and you got to coordinate all those efforts. And then there's a reporting part of it, which is the R. You got that's information through records. With those records, in the development of the process, you have machinery, you got people, you got process, you got maintenance. All of that stuff can develop trends. You know how long a particular machine is going to work before it's going to fail. You're gonna be able to predict it basically in these reporting records. Through that, you can develop a pretty good trend on what expenditures you're going to experience when, the major concerns, when it comes time for a rehab on the equipment, when it comes time for more operators or less. It depends on where you're going with it. Then, of course, you got budgeting, your fiscal planning, accounting, and control based on the reporting from everything that's happened within a certain amount of time. It's pretty important to have this stuff because the actual workers can come up with plans and ideas on how to improve the process for continuous improvement effect on where you're going with your overall equipment effectiveness. But not only that, the process might be able to be changed. The process effectiveness, and management effectiveness, where you're going with it. You can drive everything with this basic information you have. And it's not just limited to where it's just an industrial. Henry Fayol says industrial and general administration. Those are principles used within those structures. Yeah. The importance of this formula, as I expressed in describing its content, it lets companies know how to predict a situation and keep it under control if possible. If not, there are reactions. There's certain procedures they got to develop in case something catastrophic happens to happen, and they need to have an action plan on that, and where they're going to go and develop in the situation and how they're going to get to the next step efficiently. During the process, there were a lot of issues um, that are basically advantage. Every single business desires to have uh, a framework in confirming that there's an extreme output, least expenditures, and higher boundaries. In other words, they have to develop what their picture frame looks like, what they're going to do within that picture frame, and how to improve it. This formula is a technique in management where staff and personnel can be accomplished in a way which would be advantageous for any business. The notion benefits organizations to break down the effort into numerous procedures and support in receiving supreme value out of each move. In other words, I'm talking about moves where within the process, not just the equipment, but personnel as well. These phases and steps of this principles support the human resource team to deliver to the desired uh, entities of the business. Now, of course, there are disadvantages too. It's mentioned throughout the process. There's complaints and stuff about that. It's too inward looking. How to adjust the culture of production environment, knowledge of subject matter, management goals and achievements aren't mentioned. They're not identified. They're in other words, it's not broken down for each one of those areas of concern to get uh, efficient at it. Mark Moore, he wrote a book called entitled Public Value, Strategic Management and Government. Those were his big concerns. He wrote this in 1995. Management goals and achievements aren't established within their environment, but they should be done if it's done correctly. I feel in the your planning and your organization of where you're going to. Those all should be brought up in there. Um, the process has to be developing culture within an organization. That's the biggest thing that I see. Cultures are extremely difficult to change and needs to be sold from the top down. I've experienced that myself in total productive manufacturing, in that we took a whole new concept to a company, and we not only had to start the program for a cultural change, we restarted it, and we restarted it again. And on the fourth attempt, it finally worked. And today, it's a much better process. The people are happier. There's more production out of the employee. The overall equipment is effectiveness is just astronomical. And now they're going into automation of a lot of their equipment, a lot more automation of their equipment. And with that structure in mind, it's some people go for the automation, so it's taking jobs away. Well, it's not. It's the person that was working working on a specific type of specialized environment and technique and responsibility. That person now, instead of working on this one thing that they've gone through and automated it, they can work on a root cause of another problem. So it really helps the whole situation overall. And then the other issue that I have with it is today's chief executive hesitate to be confined and limited to specific constraints in cultural development, which is the same thing. It's a hard sell to get upper management, or any management that is, to change the way they're doing things. If they're successful where they're at, they're not open to real new ideas. But in the whole process, that's all changing overall. And once they realize it's, like I said, sometimes it takes 4 or 5 attempts to get it. But if the information is there, the numbers are good going in, you'll get better numbers coming out, they'll change the strategies. Okay, we went over Luther Gulick's theory of organization, which included the POSDCORB formula. We went over what the acronym stands for and defining what each step is there. We talked about advantages and we talked about disadvantages. Thank you for your time and have a great day.